My mom gave away my room to her friend's kids, then asked me to pay her bills, so I moved out. Before we dive in, Reddit Pearls needs your help. The channel is struggling, and every like and sub makes a huge difference. I appreciate you sticking around. Now, let's jump into the story. At 23, living at home wasn't exactly the life I envisioned, but it worked. I wasn't lounging around, freeloading, or making excuses. I had a routine. I paid rent. I covered the power bill, my mom's phone plan, and contributed more than any other adult in that house. In exchange, I had my own space, a room I'd converted into a content studio where I freelanced, created videos, and steadily built something for myself. It wasn't glamorous, but it was comfortable. And it was mine. Until it wasn't. My mom's best friend, Carla, came into the picture with her 2 young kids. She was going through a messy divorce, and my mom said they'd only be staying for a few weeks. It sounded temporary. I wasn't thrilled, but I understood. I kept my head down, stayed out of the way, and hoped they'd be out soon. They stayed in the guest room, and for a while, it was manageable. Sure, the kids were loud, and yes, I had to wear noise-canceling headphones most of the time. But I made do. Then came the day I walked into the house and found my studio door wide open. Laughter echoed from inside. My heart sank. Carla's kids were everywhere. My $3,000 recording setup shoved to the side like clutter. Toys on my bed. My desk chair missing. One of the kids was tapping away at my computer. I lost it. Before I could even process, my mom stepped in, unfazed. "Don't freak out," she said casually, like nothing was wrong. "They needed more space. Your room's the biggest. It's only fair." Fair? I paid rent. I built that space from nothing. And now it was a daycare center? When I asked for my room back, she brushed me off like I was being unreasonable. "They need to be comfortable. You're being selfish." My protest was dismissed as childish whining. Carla chimed in with sarcasm, calling me uptight. My mom agreed. It was like being cast as the villain in my own home. That room wasn't just a place to sleep. It was where I worked, where I earned my living. I tried to explain, but all I got was, "They're just kids. Stop making such a fuss." It didn't matter to them. Nothing I said did. I realized then, they weren't going to stop. I was no longer part of the plan. After that day, everything changed. My room wasn't mine anymore. It had become some communal playpen/storage unit. The only space I had left in the house was a cramped corner in the basement, where my old childhood bed and a folding table were crammed between laundry baskets and half-empty paint cans. It wasn't just insulting, it was impossible. I worked remotely. Video editing, freelance contracts, client meetings, all of it depended on a controlled environment. Trying to shoot content next to a rattling washer and 2 screaming toddlers? It wasn't just disruptive, it was unsustainable. When I confronted my mom again, laid out everything I was dealing with, she barely looked up from her tablet. "You're making this about yourself," she said. "This is family. We help each other." Family? Carla wasn't family. Her kids weren't my responsibility. And I had already been helping for years. Covering bills, they couldn't. Keeping the lights on. Paying rent. I reminded her of all that. And she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Well, if it's about money, maybe you should be grateful you still have a place to stay." Grateful? That was it. I packed my essentials in silence. My laptop, camera, hard drives, the bare bones of what I needed to keep working. I booked a cheap extended stay motel for a week, just to catch my breath and figure out my next move. Kathy, a family friend who'd known me since high school, caught wind of what happened. She called, asked if I was okay. I told her the truth. I was angry, heartbroken, and stuck. She offered her guest room. No strings attached, just until I got on my feet. I nearly cried. Once I was there, everything shifted. I set up a small workstation in her sunroom and got back to work. My clients didn't notice anything had changed because I didn't let it show. I hit every deadline, delivered every project. Meanwhile, back at the house, my mom sent a few texts, mostly guilt-trippy stuff. "The kids miss you. You're acting cold. You've changed." No acknowledgement of what she'd done. No apology. Just an expectation that I'd come crawling back. I didn't. For the first time in years, I was living in a space that didn't treat me like a backup plan. The quiet that followed after I left my mom's house was almost eerie. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't being called to fix something, cover someone else's mess, or justify my existence. The days at Kathy's place stretched out calmly, filled with focused work, uninterrupted sleep, and the absence of chaos. My business, somehow, started growing in that silence. Maybe it was the peace. Maybe it was finally having the mental space to think clearly. I secured a new client within a week of moving out, then another shortly after. My finances stabilized faster than I expected. For once, my energy wasn't being siphoned off by constant emotional firefighting. Every hour I worked was mine, and it was paying off. Meanwhile, the messages from my mom kept trickling in, each one more disconnected than the last. Don't you want to be part of this family? I don't understand why you're being so dramatic. They're just kids. All of them missed the point entirely. One day, she sent a selfie of Carla's youngest holding my old stuffed bear. No caption, just the image. As if that would stir something. Instead, it made me feel even more like a discarded extra in a story I didn't belong to. Kathy, watching me ride these emotional ripples, gently encouraged me to think long-term. We had coffee on her porch one morning, and she said, "You're not just recovering, you're rebuilding. Treat it like that. Lay a foundation." That stuck with me. I started looking at studio apartments. Small, affordable, quiet. Just enough space for me and my equipment. I updated my portfolio, raised my rates, and reached out to a mentor I hadn't spoken to in years. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was planning. Still, a part of me couldn't let go of the idea that maybe, just maybe, my mom would come around. That she'd recognize what she'd done. That she'd say something real. Instead, 2 weeks later, she left me a voicemail. Her tone was flat. "We need your help covering the electric bill. Things are tight right now. Can you send something this week?" "No, how are you?" "No, we miss you. Just a bill." That was when it truly hit me. I wasn't part of the family. I was part of the budget. I didn't respond. I transferred money into my savings account, paid my deposit on a small apartment across town, and circled a date on the calendar, my move-in day. It would mark the beginning of something I never had, a life that belonged to me. Update. Move-in day arrived like the final page of a long, overdue chapter. I stood in the middle of my new studio apartment, bare walls, minimal furniture, and a quiet that didn't ask for anything. No yelling kids. No borrowed spaces. Just peace. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I unpacked methodically. Desk in the corner by the window, camera gear set up facing the cleanest wall, cables tucked away with care. That first night, I ordered cheap takeout and watched the sunset through my uncovered blinds, a fork in one hand and a small surge of pride in my chest. Then, just as I was finishing dinner, my phone buzzed. It was my mom. Her message read, "Call me ASAP. It's important." I stared at it, the food suddenly heavy in my stomach. Against my better judgment, I called. Her voice was brittle, like she'd already been crying. She told me Carla had moved out abruptly, took her kids and left in the middle of the night after an argument. Left the place trashed, bills unpaid, and my mom reeling. And now, she said, she needed help. Financially. Emotionally. She needed me to come back for a little while. I stayed quiet, letting her words sit in the air. She went on, trying to frame it as a chance to reconnect. "We could rebuild things," she said. "You always knew how to handle everything better than anyone." I could almost laugh. I told her gently, but firmly, that I wouldn't be moving back, that I had my place, my work, my own life, and I wasn't giving it up to fix what she broke. Not again. She paused. Then the guilt began. "After everything I've done for you," she whispered. And that was the moment I knew she hadn't changed. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about family. It was about utility. I wasn't her child. I was her safety net. So I ended the call. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said, "Take care of yourself," and hung up. That night, I lit a candle in my new apartment. A small one, lavender-scented. It felt symbolic, something gentle, something mine. She would have to learn to stand on her own now. And so would I. The next few days after that call felt strangely light. Not joyful, exactly, but unburdened. For the first time in years, I didn't feel tethered to the constant emotional fires of someone else's chaos. I woke up in my quiet studio apartment, brewed coffee on my tiny counter, and sat by the window watching the world begin without anyone asking anything of me. My mom didn't call again. Not right away, at least. But I wasn't naive enough to think that was the end of it. Meanwhile, I doubled down on my work. I landed another freelance contract, this one with a mid-sized production company that needed regular editing support. It was consistent money, more than I'd made in the last 3 months combined. I upgraded some of my gear, not out of vanity, but out of necessity. I wasn't hustling just to survive anymore. I was building something stable, something sustainable. Kathy, who'd continued checking in from time to time, stopped by one Saturday with a small housewarming gift, a succulent in a ceramic pot and a handwritten note that said, "Nothing that takes root in peace ever grows bitter." I put it next to my desk, right where the sunlight hit in the morning. And then, predictably, the second message came from my mom. This time it was less subtle. "The water bill is overdue. I know you don't live here anymore, but it's still your family. We're struggling." I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. I had already paid my dues. I had already given too much to a house that treated me like a placeholder. Now, someone else was going to have to pick up what she let fall. Still, a part of me wondered what she told people. Did she say I abandoned her? That I was cold, ungrateful? That I left her to clean up the mess Carla made? Probably. But none of that mattered. I wasn't going to defend myself to people who didn't care enough to see the truth the first time. Instead, I filed my taxes. I signed a year lease on the apartment. I treated myself to a weekend road trip, nothing far, just a couple of hours away, where I could hike and breathe mountain air and remind myself that the world was bigger than one broken household. And on that drive back, windows down and music low, I finally let it sink in. I didn't need to feel needed to feel valuable. I didn't need to be the fixer, the provider, or the fallback plan. I just needed to be free. A few weeks passed, and life began to feel normal. Not the kind of normal that comes from routine, but the kind that feels earned. I woke up each morning without dread, brewed my coffee without rushing to clean someone else's mess, and sat at my desk knowing that everything in this space was mine, created by me, for me. Work was steady. Clients were satisfied. I even had the time and headspace to start creating content for myself again. Videos that weren't commissioned or curated for someone else's brand, but ones I wanted to make. That freedom sparked something I hadn't felt in years: joy. And still, there was silence from my mom. No apology. No recognition. Just the void she always left when things didn't go her way. I got updates secondhand through a cousin who messaged me from time to time. Apparently, my mom had taken in another house guest, a coworker's niece, or something like that. Different person, same story. My old room was now a revolving door. A temporary space for anyone but the one who built it. That truth hit me harder than I expected. It confirmed everything. I was never her priority. I was never the one she wanted to support, only the one she expected to sacrifice. But here's the twist, realizing that didn't break me. It made me bulletproof. One quiet Thursday afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten, addressed from a name I hadn't seen in years, my grandmother. She'd heard about what happened. She wanted me to know she was proud of me, for leaving, for standing up for myself, for choosing something better. I read that letter 3 times, folded it carefully, and tucked it into my desk drawer like a talisman. She saw me. She chose to see me. That weekend, I applied to speak at a local creative conference. My topic? Rebuilding from Disregard. A talk about finding purpose in the aftermath of being treated like an afterthought. I wasn't sure they'd accept me, but I hit submit anyway. It wasn't about being accepted anymore. It was about claiming space I used to think I had to earn. I don't know if my mom will ever realize what she lost when she gave away my room. Maybe she doesn't care. But I do. Because that room wasn't just a place to sleep. It was the beginning of everything I've built since. And now, I've got 4 walls of my own. A career. A future. A foundation no one can evict me from. Update. When I got the email from the creative conference confirming my spot as a speaker, I sat in stunned silence. Not because I didn't believe I could do it, but because I had finally stopped waiting for someone else to say I mattered. And then they did. The event was small, but the impact wasn't. I stood on a modest stage in front of 50 strangers and told the story I used to be afraid of. I spoke about what it meant to be pushed out of the space you created, about rebuilding from the ground up when the people who should support you become your biggest obstacle. And as I talked, I saw heads nod. People got it. They really got it. After the talk, someone approached me. A woman in her 40s, tears in her eyes. She said, "You told my story." We stood there for a moment, 2 people from different lives connected by the same thread. The quiet pain of being treated as disposable. I walked away from that night with more than applause. I walked away with clarity. This wasn't just about a room. It never was. It was about value. Identity. Voice. That room was the first place I had carved out for myself in a world that kept asking me to shrink. And when they gave it away, they thought I'd crumble. Instead, I expanded. I started a podcast the next month. I called it Unboxed, a space to talk about unlearning toxic family dynamics, building independence, and finding joy in starting over. The first episode? My story. It's strange how much can change when you stop asking for permission to exist. How far can you go when you're no longer waiting to be seen? My mom hasn't reached out again. Maybe she's embarrassed. Maybe she still thinks I'll come around. Or maybe she doesn't think about me at all. But I don't carry that weight anymore. I've stopped looking back. My life is here now, among people who value me, within walls I paid for, on platforms I built with my own 2 hands. They took my room. I took my future. This story hit differently. It wasn't about dramatic blow-ups. It was about the slow erosion of dignity in a place that should have been safe. What's powerful is that she didn't wait for an apology. She didn't beg to be seen. She just left. Quietly. Smartly. And she made her future from scratch. That kind of healing doesn't come with closure. It comes with self-respect. And this story had plenty of it. If someone took your space and treated you like a backup plan, how would you respond? Have you ever had to walk away from your own family to protect your peace? Let us know in the comments.